A couple weeks ago, I had a woman who lives fairly near to here come into the office, and she had a lot of heavy things going on with her, and I visited with her for quite a while. And she said, "Could I see your facilities?" And I said, "Well, of course, sure." And so we came into the auditorium, and I was showing her the auditorium, and she saw our sign, and she said, "Huh, love outpoured. What does that even mean? What do you mean? I don't understand." And it really started to hit me about this idea that we live in a world that does not really understand the kind of love that God calls for us to have for each other and for those around us and for the people that we live with and for God's creation. And so I started to think more and more about that, and I thought, our year and our theme this year is love outpoured. That we take and we pour out this love that God poured into us, that it flows from Him into us and out of us into our community, into people that we care about and the people that we love and the people that we want to have relationships with. And I proceeded to explain to her about the bulbs and how people made commitments to loving other people this year, and she was really kind of intrigued by that. And I started thinking, when we look in our scriptures, we are called to love so many different times. As a matter of fact, when we look in First Corinthians, it talks to us this idea of all these incredible powers, the ability to speak and to prophesy and do all these things. And he says, but yet the bigger thing in all that is love. And as he finishes out the chapter in that, he says, out of these the things that we talk about, the three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of everything is love. When Jesus is asked this idea of what is the greatest command, is to love the Lord. And the second is to love our neighbor. And so we hear this idea of love so many times. So I wanted to kind of start to look at this idea of what does that look like? What does a godly love, a love that we are to possess, look like, and how do we develop that more? There was a group of professionals that asked children ages 4 to 8 on what love is, if they could describe love. Now, you think that's not that hard of a task, but really it can be pretty difficult to try to put into words what love is. But they did a pretty good job, and I wanted to read some of these for you. Rebecca says, when my grandmother got arthritis, she couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So my grandpa does it for her all the time. Even when his hands got the arthritis too, he still paints her nails. Carl says, love is when a girl puts on perfume and a boy puts on shaving cologne and they go out and they smell each other. That's what love is. Okay? Chrissy says, love is when you go out to eat and give somebody most of your french fries without making them give any of theirs to you. That's love. Terry says, love is what makes you smile when you're tired. Emily says, love is when you kiss all the time. Then you get tired of kissing. You still want to be together and talk more. My mommy and daddy are like that. They look gross when they kiss. Noel says, loving is when you tell a guy you like his shirt, then he wears it every day. Claire says, my mommy loves me more than anybody. You don't see anyone else kissing me to sleep at night. That's what love is. Marianne says, love is when your puppy licks your face after you've left him all day. Bethany says, I let my big sister pick on me because my mom says she only picks on me because she loves me. So I pick on my baby sister to show her I love her. And finally, Jessica says, you really shouldn't say I love you unless you mean it. But if you mean it, you should say it a lot because people forget. Sometimes out of the mouths of babes, they start to understand this idea of love. And as we look into the idea of love, God kind of really helps us out with this in 1 Corinthians. And in chapter 13, starting in verse 4, he literally says, this is what love is, and this is what love is not. And I wanted to start with the very first thing he leads off with. He doesn't say love is this incredible feeling. Love is this action that you do that makes everybody feel so good. Love is that fluttering in your heart when you see the certain person. That's not the way it starts out. The scripture instead says this: love is patient. Why in the world, when you were going to describe love, would you say patience is the very first thing when you describe love? I think it's done for a reason. I think because it's kind of like this. When you love someone, you have patience. When you care for someone, you have patience. Let me give you an illustration that I think you all could understand. Imagine, if you will, you're in your car and you got somewhere to go and you're in a little bit of a hurry. And you pull up to the stoplight and the light changes and you are anxiously awaiting on the light to change. You know that you've got to get somewhere. You're in a hurry. And then you see somebody at the crosswalk. And it's an elderly lady in her 90s with a walker. And she starts to walk across the crosswalk ever so slowly. Now, you got that picture in your mind. Think about the emotions that you have and your reactions to the 94-year-old woman crossing with a crosswalk with a walker. Now change the scenario. You're in a really big hurry. You got a lot going on, and it's an 18-year-old kid who's not paying attention on his phone and stops in front of your car when you're trying to go somewhere and you've got the green light. Let me ask you a question. Do you treat the two of them the same? Do you look at the 18-year-old and go, that poor guy, he just doesn't realize that the light is changing? I'm sure that the application that he's on his phone, or the texting or twittering that he's doing, is very important to him, and I should be patient as he stands in front of my car because I really need to go, but I know what he's doing is very valuable as well. Or are you like, move, kid? Now on the backside of that, here's our 94-year-old grandmother going across, and she stops. She's exhausted. She's in front of your car. You're like, move it, Granny. I got to get somewhere. We don't do that, do we? We look at that with compassion and love. We can see that there is something going on with her. We can see that she is doing to the best of her ability. And we have compassion and patience for that. See, we have the ability to have patience when we want to have patience. And God says that if you are going to truly love someone, the very first thing that you need to do is to be patient. And yet it's the thing that so many of us say, I'm not good at. How many times have you heard people joke or say something like, I know better than to pray for patience? Right? We all warn each other about that. One thing you don't want to be praying for is you don't want to have God help you get more patience, because that means you're going to have to go through some stuff to be able to get that. We always joke about that. We always say, oh, no, I don't want to be praying for that. Right? But the fact of the matter is that patience is intrinsically locked in with love. As we look at our scriptures and our different things this morning, I wanted to show you 3 different points I want you to understand. Loving patiently comes through the devotion to something bigger than ourselves. When we look at this idea of being patient and loving like God, the reason why we're able to do that is because we have a devotion to something bigger than myself. The scriptures say it this way. Romans 12:12. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourself. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope. Be patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. He says, love has to be real. And the only way that it can be real is by that you start to honor somebody else above yourself. The picture is bigger than you. Never stopping your zeal and your fire for the Lord, right? And serving God, but to be joyful. Man, I can be patient, but I don't have to like it. Hold on. That's not what God says about love. Not only am I patient, but I am joyful that I have the opportunity to be patient. You realize this when you think something has been taken away and you receive it again. See, a lot of times we don't have patience for even sometimes the people that we love until we realize that they may not be around anymore. We don't have a lot of patience for those who we love until we realize that that may not be an option anymore. And he says you need to realize that something is bigger than you and to be joyful that you have the opportunity to have this relationship with this brother or this sister, that you can be patient with them because Christ has been patient with you. See, loving patiently is a reflection of our calling. It's part of who we are. We can't go into these waters and declare that we are Christians and declare that we follow Jesus Christ and not love patiently. It's not possible. Look what it says in Scripture. As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle and patient, bearing with one another in love. As a prisoner for the Lord. He doesn't say there as an option as a believer. He says, I have surrendered the very being of who I am. And because God rules my life, because everything that I do should be a reflection of Him, because this is the calling that I have been given, this is for how I represent Jesus Christ Himself inside of me. This is how the Holy Spirit works through me, that I can become humble and gentle and patient. And I bear what goes on with other people with love. See, patient in the hard times is what God calls for us to do. It's easy for me to be patient with the people that aren't going to give me any problems. It's easy for me to be patient for people that don't hit that one nerve. It's easy for the people that are always getting along with me, that think I'm wonderful, that make me feel good about myself. Oh man, yeah, I can be patient with them. But God says our calling is to be loving and patient with everyone anyway, despite of what they do. Colossians 3:12 says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, because I love you like this, clothe yourself with compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Put it on as the very fabric of what you wear every day. See, God calls for us not to be the complainers because things aren't going the way that we wanted them to go. God calls for us to be the people that understand that people take time to develop. People take time to get it right. People are going to make mistakes. That as Christians, we love them through their mistakes. And we are patient with them. They should have known this by now. They've been a Christian far too long to know better than this. How many times have I told them to not do this? I warned them about this. He calls for us to be patient and loving and gentle. I'll be the first one to confess. It's hard for me sometimes, even with the people that I love, to be patient. It just is. It's hard for me until I remember that somebody has been patient with me. See, it's hard for me to remember to be patient whenever I don't think that I have flaws, that people have had to wait for me to develop and for me to get to where I am. It's hard for me to do that when I don't remember that Jesus saw me as the person that I used to be and patiently said, I'm still willing to give myself up on the cross. See, it's hard for me to realize that the mentors that I had in the church, the older people in the church that saw me as a real pain in the rear end, a kid that had no future, still saw something in me and were patient to follow through. God calls for us to be humble and gentle and patient. Loving patiently is rewarding in the long term. And that's one of the things we really need to remember. That when we love people patiently, it's rewarding in the long term. I want to bring up 4 different people to you that maybe you know. First of which is Einstein. We kind of know him because he is one of the greatest physicists to ever live. He gave us so much of our knowledge. Are you aware that Einstein, whenever he was 4 years old, couldn't even speak? That he didn't even learn to start reading until he was 7? When you look at this man, he's probably the wisest man, the smartest man to live in our era, our time frame within the last 100 years, and he couldn't even speak till he was 4. He couldn't read till he was 7. And yet somebody loved him enough that even though he wasn't performing the way that everyone else did, had patience and stayed with him and kept on working with him. Or maybe this guy, Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds that give us so much of the laws that we go by now today. Do you realize that he almost failed out of grammar school, out of elementary? That he was not a smart kid, and yet look how far he's come and how far he came and how much he changed the world as we know it. Or I love this one. How about Tolstoy? Those of you all that are writers and readers, did you realize that he flunked out of college? That Tolstoy couldn't even get a college degree. And yet he writes one of the most famous writings, one of the hardest, difficult reads ever. He writes that. Or my favorite of all, this guy, Walt Disney. Walt Disney's a really neat character I want to talk to you about. Walt Disney, whenever he first had grown up, he got a job with a paper in Kansas City. And he was an illustrator, and he would draw things. And the paper looked at him, and as they watched him do his work, they were so disappointed in him. As a matter of fact, they fired him. They said he had no creative bone in his body and that he didn't have any talent. And so they got rid of him. But he didn't want to give up. And no one could see the future in him, but he just didn't want to give up. He needed somebody to be patient with him. And he went to a local church there, and he convinced the church that he would draw the illustrations for their signs and things that were coming out, that he would do drawings for them for the church. And so the church couldn't really afford to pay him hardly anything, but they said, sure, we'll take you on and we'll feed you and take care of you. And so what he did was he came in there, and the church had no money, but what they did have was a garage next to the church building. And Walt Disney in his early 20s, with nowhere else to go, just trying to make it, moved into a garage that was filled with mice. And he lived in this garage, and he drew pictures for the church for years. And as he was drawing, he started to really notice his surroundings, and there was a mouse that would come out all the time that he named Mickey. And he started drawing that mouse. And now today it's one of the most iconic symbols the world's known. Because of him not giving up on himself, because somebody in a church that looked at him and said, that person is worth something. We're going to be patient with this guy. We're going to go ahead and love this guy. He changed so many things in our culture as we know it. He's brought joy and happiness to so many people that so many different things that he has illustrated and drawn would have just been for naught if somebody didn't have patience with him and love him where he was. Second Chronicles, it tells us this in 2 and 5. And in the midst of this, you need to understand what's happening here. And I'll kind of explain as we read. Listen to me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. And in this situation in the scriptures, it's talking about this idea that they're trying to bring back the idea of God into their culture. They're trying to go back to godly ways. And God says, if you seek him, if you seek me, you'll find me. And don't give up. We don't give up. And I want us to understand that there is a reward when we are patient with people in love. There is a reward when we love with patience. You may not see it today, and you may not see it tomorrow, but it is there. There are people that sit in this auditorium today because somebody loved them when no one else would. That had patience with them whenever they were not the kind of people that they wanted to be today. That they didn't get it all right. That they were the ones that were screaming out in the auditorium whenever they were walking out with their moms. They were the ones that couldn't sit still. They were the ones that were causing the grief. They were the ones who were getting into things that they didn't need to get into. And countless numbers of those children, because people loved them and were patient with them and continued to teach them and work with them, now are elders in the church, are deacons in the church, are teachers that stood up today because somebody was patient with them and somebody loved them. God calls for us to have that kind of love. In James 5, it says this: be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and the spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. And he tells us that when we love other people patiently, we need to be able to understand that it's like a crop being planted. That you don't always see the results tomorrow or the next day. It's the patience that pays off. When you see a brother or sister that causes you discomfort, that causes you a hard time, that you be patient with them. Continue to love them. Do not give up on them. Plant that seed, water that seed, and watch it grow. And in time, you will be rewarded because of how much you love and you are patient when you love. In Galatians 6:9, as we finish out, says this: let us not be weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if you don't give up. God is not a quitter on you. And he calls you to not be a quitter on him and not to be a quitter on the people that are around you and the people that need to hear about Jesus' love. We have an incredible message to give. And it is time for us to be patiently continuing on and doing that. What is love? Love is patient. Love is patient. Jesus' love was patient for you, and he calls for you to be patient as well. This morning, I know some of us have a difficulty with this, and maybe it's time for us to pray for God to, instead of teach us more patience, for God to teach us how to love more patiently. Because it's a beautiful thing to be able to do. If we can help you this morning with prayers or any kind of a study, would you allow us to do that as we stand and as we sing?